Amara Johnson had always been a force to be reckoned with. A Harvard graduate with honors, she was now the vice president of marketing at one of New York's most prestigious firms. At 32, she was the epitome of success, elegant, confident, and respected. Her sharp wit and undeniable charm made her a favorite in both boardrooms and black tie events. People admired her for what they saw on the surface. A strong, beautiful black woman breaking glass ceilings in a world that wasn't always kind to her. But beneath the impeccable facade, Amara guarded a secret that felt heavier with every passing year. At 28, she had been diagnosed with alopecia universalis, a rare autoimmune condition that caused total hair loss. Overnight, she had gone from having a head full of thick natural curls to waking up with strands of hair scattered across her pillow. Within weeks, her eyebrows and eyelashes disappeared too, leaving her skin smooth and bare. The mirror became her enemy, reflecting an image she could hardly recognize. At first, she had tried to embrace the change. She told herself that beauty was more than hair, that she was still the same brilliant woman underneath. But the world didn't see it that way. The stares, the whispers, the sympathetic smiles, they wore her down. Hair was power, especially for black women, and without it, she felt stripped of her identity. The corporate world, with its unspoken rules and subtle prejudices, was unforgiving. She couldn't afford to be seen as different, not when she was already navigating the challenges of being a black woman in a predominantly white industry. So, Amara adapted. She invested in the finest wigs money could buy, custom-made, lightweight, and styled to perfection. Each morning, she meticulously applied makeup to recreate the eyebrows and lashes she once had. It was an exhausting routine, but it worked. The world saw what she wanted them to see, a flawless woman who had it all together. Not even Mark, her boyfriend of 2 years, knew the truth. Mark Reynolds was everything society told her she should want. A successful businessman with a jawline that could cut glass and a wardrobe full of tailored suits. They met at a networking event, and his confidence had been magnetic. He pursued her with the kind of determination she admired, and soon they became the it couple in their social circles. Mark loved to show her off, often calling her his queen, and boasting about her achievements to anyone who would listen. But Amara couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that Mark loved the image of her more than the reality. He adored her beauty, her poise, her ability to command a room. What would happen if he saw her without the armor? If he saw the scars she worked so hard to hide? She had thought about telling him, but every time she imagined his reaction, fear paralyzed her. It wasn't just Mark she was afraid of losing. It was the respect, the status, the illusion of control she had worked so hard to build. Her secret became a wall between them, but Mark never seemed to notice. He was too busy planning their future, talking about the empire they could build together. Amara smiled and nodded, all the while wondering if she could ever truly let him in. The pressure of it all was suffocating. By day, she was the picture of success, gliding through meetings and events with practiced ease. By night, she sat alone in front of her vanity, peeling off the layers of her disguise and staring at the bald, vulnerable woman underneath. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she didn't even have the energy for that. But no matter how lonely or exhausted she felt, Amara refused to let anyone see her crack. Vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not in her world. Not with her secret. The annual Manhattan Prestige Charity Gala was the kind of event that could make or break reputations. Held in one of New York City's most opulent ballrooms, it was a glittering affair attended by the city's elite, CEOs, socialites, influencers, and anyone who mattered. For Amara, it wasn't just another event. It was an opportunity to solidify her standing among the upper echelons of society. She had spent weeks preparing, choosing the perfect midnight blue gown that hugged her curves and sparkled under the light, commissioning a stylist to perfect her hair and ensuring her makeup was flawless. Tonight she would shine. Mark was by her side as always, dressed in a sleek black tuxedo that made him look every bit the polished businessman he was. His hand rested on the small of her back as they entered the ballroom, the flash of cameras capturing their every step. "You're stunning," he whispered in her ear, his voice dripping with pride. Amara smiled, though her stomach churned with unease. Events like these always made her feel like she was walking a tightrope. One misstep, one crack in her carefully constructed facade, and everything could come crashing down. The night started well enough. They mingled with guests, exchanged pleasantries, and posed for photos. Amara's confidence grew as she navigated the crowd with ease, her laughter ringing out like music. She had almost convinced herself that tonight would be one of her triumphs, until Olivia Sinclair arrived. Olivia was a name Amara had heard before, though they had never formally met. She was a social media influencer with millions of followers, known for her glamorous lifestyle and razor-sharp tongue. More importantly, she was Mark's ex, a fact that Amara tried to ignore but couldn't entirely forget. Olivia had a way of commanding attention, her long blonde hair cascading in waves, and her designer dress clinging to her like a second skin. When she spotted Mark and Amara across the room, her eyes lit with a predatory gleam. "Amara, darling," Olivia drawled as she approached, her red lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You look absolutely divine. That dress is ambitious." The subtle insult was wrapped in faux politeness, but Amara didn't flinch. She had dealt with women like Olivia before, women who saw her as a threat and tried to undermine her with backhanded compliments. "Olivia," Amara replied smoothly, her voice calm and measured. "Thank you. I didn't realize you'd be here tonight. I suppose the guest list is more inclusive than I thought." Mark chuckled awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the tension between the two women. "Let's grab another drink, shall we?" he said, attempting to steer the conversation elsewhere. But Olivia wasn't ready to let go. "You know, Mark and I used to come to these galas together," Olivia said, her tone dripping with nostalgia. "He always had such good taste in women, though I must say you're different, aren't you, Amara?" Amara's jaw tightened, but she refused to let Olivia get under her skin. "Different can be a good thing," she said, her voice steady. "After all, someone has to stand out in a room full of carbon copies." The exchange might have ended there if Olivia hadn't decided to escalate. Her smile grew wider, almost manic, as she stepped closer to Amara. "Oh, I agree," she said sweetly. "And speaking of standing out, I've always wondered, how do you make your hair look so perfect? It's almost too perfect." Amara's heart stopped. She could feel the blood drain from her face as Olivia's words settled over her like a storm cloud. Before she could respond, Olivia reached out with lightning speed and yanked the wig off her head. The world seemed to freeze. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Amara's bald head was exposed under the glaring lights of the ballroom. For a moment, there was silence. A deafening, suffocating silence. And then, the whispers began. Snickers. Cameras flashing. The humiliation was immediate and overwhelming. Amara stood rooted to the spot, her hands trembling as she reached up to touch her bare scalp. She could feel the heat of 100 eyes on her, each one dissecting her, judging her, stripping her of the dignity she had worked so hard to maintain. Her chest tightened, her vision blurred, and for a moment, she thought she might faint. But the worst blow came from Mark. He didn't step forward to defend her. He didn't wrap his arms around her and shield her from the stares. Instead, he took a step back, his face contorted with disgust. "I thought you were different," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. The words hit her like a slap, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. Different. He had meant perfect, flawless. And now that the illusion was shattered, so was his affection. Amara's knees buckled, and she collapsed to the floor, her gown pooling around her as tears streamed down her face. She could hear Olivia's laughter ringing in her ears, sharp and cruel. She could feel the weight of the cameras documenting her breakdown, turning her into a spectacle. But she couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. It wasn't until a security guard approached her that she managed to pull herself together enough to stand. Clutching the wig in her trembling hands, she stumbled out of the ballroom, leaving behind the whispers, the stares, and the man who had betrayed her. Amara was vaguely aware of the beeping monitors and the sterile smell of antiseptic as consciousness returned. She opened her eyes slowly, her vision adjusting to the dim light of the hospital room. For a moment, the events of the previous night were a blur, but as the memories came rushing back, shame and despair tightened in her chest like a vice. The gala, Olivia, the wig, Mark. Her hands instinctively flew to her head, feeling the smooth surface of her scalp. Her wig was gone, probably discarded somewhere in the chaos after her collapse. She swallowed hard, her throat dry and raw from crying. The humiliation felt fresh, like an open wound. All she could think about was the sea of faces staring at her. The laughter, the whispers, the betrayal in Mark's eyes. A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiral of thoughts. A nurse peeked in, her kind smile doing little to ease Amara's pain. "Good morning, Ms. Johnson. How are you feeling?" "Like my world just ended," Amara muttered, her voice hoarse. The nurse hesitated, her expression softening with empathy. "You're not alone, you know. A lot of women go through what you're feeling right now. It gets better." Amara's lips pressed into a thin line. She appreciated the sentiment, but it felt hollow in the face of what had happened. How could it get better when her secret had been laid bare for the world to see? She wasn't just another woman dealing with alopecia. She was a public figure, and the humiliation was already trending online. She didn't even need to check her phone to know that. The internet was ruthless. The nurse stepped aside and a man entered the room. He was tall and lean, his salt and pepper hair neatly trimmed, and his presence carried an air of quiet authority. His tailored suit suggested he wasn't just another hospital staff member. "Ms. Johnson," the man said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I'm Dr. Paul Carter. I heard about what happened, and I wanted to check in on you personally." Amara frowned, confused. "Are you my doctor?" "Not exactly," he replied with a small smile. "I'm the CEO of Revitalife, a startup focused on helping individuals rebuild their confidence and self-esteem after life-changing medical conditions. I specialize in cases like yours." Her defenses immediately went up. "I don't need pity or a sales pitch," she said sharply, crossing her arms. Dr. Carter didn't flinch. "I'm not here to sell you anything, Ms. Johnson. I'm here because I understand what it's like to feel like your identity is tied to something outside of your control." Amara raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "You understand? With all due respect, Dr. Carter, I doubt you've ever been humiliated in front of hundreds of people and turned into a meme overnight." "No, I haven't," he admitted, his tone steady. "But I've seen it happen to others. I've worked with models who lost their limbs in accidents, athletes with disfiguring injuries, and cancer survivors who struggled to redefine their beauty. Every single one of them thought they'd lost everything, but they found themselves again. And so will you." His words hung in the air, settling over Amara like a tentative balm. She wanted to dismiss him, to cling to her pain and anger, but something in his tone made her pause. He wasn't patronizing her. He wasn't pitying her. He was speaking to her as an equal, someone capable of rising above her circumstances. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, her voice softer now. Dr. Carter pulled up a chair and sat beside her bed. "Because I've seen too many brilliant, beautiful people let the world convince them they're less than they are. And because I see someone in front of me who has the potential to turn this pain into something extraordinary." Amara blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his eyes. It had been so long since someone looked at her and saw more than the image she projected. For the first time since the gala, a flicker of hope stirred within her, faint but undeniable. "I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can," he said firmly, "but it's a choice only you can make. I can help, but you have to take the first step." She didn't respond immediately, her mind racing with doubts and fears. But beneath it all, a spark of determination began to flicker. She had spent years building her life around an illusion, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to build something real. "Okay," she said finally, meeting his gaze. "What's the first step?" Dr. Carter smiled, his expression warm and encouraging. "The first step is realizing that your worth has nothing to do with what anyone else sees. It's about how you see yourself. And once you embrace that, the rest will follow." Amara nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. She wasn't sure if she was ready to believe them yet. But for the first time in days, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope. The first few weeks after the gala were the hardest. Amara stayed away from public spaces, her phone turned off to avoid the tidal wave of online ridicule. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mark's disgusted face, Olivia's cruel smirk, and the flashing cameras that had immortalized her humiliation. It felt as though the world had moved on, but she was still frozen in that moment, trapped in a cycle of shame and self-doubt. But something else lingered too. Dr. Carter's words, "Your worth has nothing to do with what anyone else sees." At first, they felt like a cliché, but as the days passed, they began to take root in her mind. She couldn't change what had happened at the gala. She couldn't undo the cruelty of others. But maybe, just maybe, she could reclaim her narrative. With hesitant fingers, Amara turned her phone back on. As expected, her inbox was flooded with messages, some from friends offering sympathy, many from strangers offering unsolicited advice or judgment. But buried beneath the noise was an email from Dr. Carter. Subject: When you're ready. Amara, I hope you're holding up. I wanted to let you know that our team at Revita Life is ready to support you with whatever you need. Whether it's counseling, public relations, or simply a space to talk, we're here. You're stronger than you think. Pole. The sincerity of his words brought tears to her eyes. For the first time since the gala, she felt a flicker of connection, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. Taking a deep breath, she replied with a single sentence: Let's talk. The next day, Amara found herself sitting across from Dr. Carter in a sleek office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. He listened as she poured out her fears, her anger, her regret. She spoke of the pressure to be perfect, the prejudice she faced as a black woman in a corporate world, and the unbearable weight of her secret. By the time she finished, her voice was raw, but her heart felt lighter. What do you want, Amara? Dr. Carter asked, his tone gentle but firm. Not what the world expects of you. What do you want? The question caught her off guard. She had spent so much of her life striving to meet others' expectations that she had never truly asked herself what she wanted. After a long pause, she finally said, I want to feel whole. I want to stop hiding. And I want to help others who feel like I do. Dr. Carter smiled. Then let's make that happen. The next few months were a whirlwind. With Dr. Carter's guidance, Amara began to rebuild, not just her confidence, but her identity. She threw herself into therapy, confronting the insecurities that had haunted her since her diagnosis. She joined support groups for women with alopecia, hearing their stories and finding strength in their resilience. For the first time, she allowed herself to be vulnerable, and in doing so, she discovered a community that embraced her for who she truly was. But Amara didn't stop there. Inspired by the stories she heard, she began to dream of creating a platform to amplify their voices. She envisioned a brand that celebrated beauty in all its forms, a brand that challenged society's narrow standards and empowered those who felt invisible. With her marketing expertise and Dr. Carter's resources, she set to work. The result was True Radiance, a global beauty and empowerment brand dedicated to inclusivity and authenticity. The launch campaign featured women of all backgrounds, bald, scarred, disabled, and everything in between, sharing their stories with pride. Amara herself appeared in the campaign, her bald head uncovered for the world to see. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. For the first time, she felt truly seen. The response was overwhelming. True Radiance quickly gained traction, securing partnerships with major beauty brands and landing Amara on the cover of magazines. She became a sought-after speaker, appearing on talk shows and at conferences to share her journey. The very platform that once humiliated her now became a stage for her triumph. One night, as she scrolled through True Radiance's social media page, Amara stumbled upon a message from a young girl named Tasha. Hi Amara, my name is Tasha and I'm 14. I have alopecia, and I used to wear hats all the time because I didn't want anyone to see my head. But after I saw your campaign, I decided to go to school without my hat. People stared, but I didn't care because I felt beautiful for the first time. Thank you for showing me that I'm more than my hair. Tears streamed down Amara's face as she read the message. This was why she had fought so hard, why she had refused to let her pain define her. She wasn't just reclaiming her own worth. She was helping others do the same. It had been almost a year since the gala, a year of pain, growth, and triumph. Amara had risen from the ashes of humiliation, her name now synonymous with strength and empowerment. True Radiance was thriving, and so was she. For the first time in her life, she felt free, no longer burdened by the need to hide or conform. She was unapologetically herself, and the world was finally seeing her for who she truly was. But not everyone from her past was ready to let go. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Mark showed up at her office unannounced. Amara was reviewing campaign ideas with her team when her assistant nervously intercepted her with a whispered warning. "He's in the lobby," she said, her eyes wide. Amara didn't need to ask who he was. A part of her had expected this moment, though she wasn't sure how she'd feel when it finally came. With a calm she hadn't known she possessed, she excused herself and headed to the lobby. Mark stood near the glass doors, his tailored suit as impeccable as ever. But there was something different about him now, a nervousness in his posture, a vulnerability she had never seen before. When he spotted her, his face lit up with a hopeful smile. "Amara," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "You look amazing." She crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "What do you want, Mark?" "I wanted to see you," he said, stepping closer. "I've been following everything you've been doing, the campaign, the brand, the interviews. You're incredible, Amara. I was a fool to walk away from you. I didn't know how to handle everything back then, but I've realized how much I need you in my life. I made a mistake and I'm here to make it right." Amara stared at him, her chest tightening, not with longing, but with the sharp clarity of how far she had come. There was a time when she would have given anything to hear those words, to have him look at her with admiration instead of disgust. But now, they meant nothing. "You didn't walk away from me, Mark," she said, her voice steady. "You walked away from the idea of me, the perfect polished image you created in your head. You didn't love me. You loved the fantasy. And when that fantasy shattered, you showed me who you really are." Mark's face fell, his confidence crumbling. "Amara, please." "No," she interrupted, her tone firm. "I've spent too much time building myself back up to let you tear me down again. I don't need your validation, and I don't need you." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the lobby, a relic of a past she had outgrown. Olivia Sinclair's downfall was just as public as her cruelty had been. The video of her pulling off Amara's wig had gone viral, sparking outrage and condemnation. Sponsors dropped her, followers abandoned her, and her carefully curated image crumbled under the weight of her actions. Amara didn't revel in Olivia's misfortune, but she couldn't deny the sense of justice it brought. Months later, Olivia attempted to apologize on a talk show, tears streaming down her face as she blamed her actions on a moment of poor judgment. But the world wasn't so quick to forgive. Amara watched the segment while sipping tea in her apartment, feeling nothing but a quiet sense of closure. As for Amara, her greatest victory wasn't in the success of True Radiance or the downfall of her enemies. It was in the quiet moments of self-acceptance she had fought so hard to achieve. One evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, she sat on the balcony of her apartment with Dr. Paul Carter by her side. Their relationship had grown slowly, built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of what it meant to rebuild. He didn't see her as a project or a victim. He saw her as an equal, a partner, a woman who had faced the worst and come out stronger. "You know," Paul said, his voice filled with admiration, "when I first met you, I knew you were extraordinary. But seeing you now, it's like watching someone step into their full power." Amara smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have," he replied gently. "You just needed someone to remind you of who you've always been." As they sat together, watching the city lights flicker like stars, Amara realized that her beauty and worth had never been in her hair, her image, or anyone else's approval. They had always been within her, waiting for her to claim them. And now, she finally had.